Okay, I think we're ready to start. Mackenzie, we have everyone in our waiting room, and everything's live. So I think we're ready to go. Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Lindsay Richardson, and I'm the Senior Community Planner with the Town of Fort Erie. First off, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank those of you who have visited the Let's Talk Fort Erie website and completed our cannabis survey. If you haven't done this yet, I encourage you to visit www.letstalk.forterie.ca and do so. This site is also our main source of communication for this project. It includes some background information. There's a section for frequently asked questions. There's a copy of this presentation and also some links to the federal legislation for cannabis. This site is updated fairly regularly as new information becomes available. So please make sure you do have a look around the site, and remember to click on the Stay Informed link at the bottom of the page to ensure that you're kept up to date on this study. The purpose for this open house is to review some of the background information that we've compiled, and also to present the various options for regulating commercial cannabis as a land use in the town. I'm joined tonight by Mackenzie Ceci from the town, who most of you have already spoken with, and as well as Paul Lowes and Suzanne McDonald from SGL Planning and Design Inc., who will be giving a brief presentation very shortly. Once the presentation is complete, we will be opening up the virtual floor for those who wish to speak. And as Mackenzie noted, registered speakers will have up to 10 minutes to speak. And once we've gone through the list of registered speakers, and if time permits, we will open the floor to anyone else who does wish to speak that's in our virtual waiting room. An additional note for this evening, we will not be focusing on or able to provide responses to comments, questions, or concerns as they relate to illegal grow-ops or the federal legislation that permits the growth or retail sale of cannabis. These are topics that are outside the scope of our study, and while we appreciate that there definitely are concerns around these issues, this study is really only examining the legislation and policy around legal and licensed commercial cannabis operations, and the planning tools that the town can put in place to regulate these as a land use. If you do have concerns related to illegal grow-ops and or the federal legislation, please feel free to contact me directly or through the Let's Talk Fort Erie site, and I will definitely ensure that those comments are passed on to the appropriate contacts. I am going to turn the meeting over to Suzanne and to Paul at this time, but again, I thank everyone for their time and your participation this evening. We do look forward to hearing you and to hearing your comments. Suzanne and Paul?
I'm just going to screen share the presentation. Is that visible, Lindsay?
Yes, I can see that.
Oh, except I'm on the last page. One second. Better to start at the beginning. Thank you, Lindsay. So as Lindsay spoke about, Paul and I are going to be presenting this evening about the work that we've been doing so far for the town of Fort Erie on cannabis. And so this is a quick overview of what I'll be speaking about this evening. So the legal framework of cannabis in Canada, how this relates to the planning framework in Fort Erie. We'll be looking at what other municipalities have been doing nearby, and also going over a few options that the town can consider with regards to this use. So to take a step back, overall, our study purpose is to examine the opportunities for the town to regulate activities permitted under the Cannabis Act, specifically the commercial growing and production of cannabis. And our purpose is to assess and recommend any changes to the town's official plan and our zoning bylaws in order to regulate cannabis production as a land use within the town. So what's in the scope of this project is land uses specifically related to the commercial cultivation and processing of recreational medical cannabis. Things that we aren't looking at is the personal growth of cannabis, of recreational cannabis. This in Canada, up to 4 plants can be grown in a dwelling. That's not part of the scope of our study. And also, we're not looking at the retail sale of cannabis. This is regulated at the provincial level, and in Fort Erie, retail sale of cannabis is permitted where retail sales in zones where retail sales are generally permitted, subject to meeting the province's requirements and being licensed by the province. So in terms of our study process, as Lindsay mentioned, we've been doing a lot of background research, and that formed phase 1. And then we're in phase 2 of our study, which includes formulating policy options for the town to consider. And I just wanted to highlight here that there's no decisions being made on the study this evening. Really, the point of this open house is to explain some of the background and go over some of the options that the town has, and for us to share that information with all of you and hear some feedback back as well. So recommendations on the preferred approach or what the town will do moving forward, that won't come until phase 3. So I wanted to quickly just go over the roles of the different levels of government as it relates to cannabis. So in Canada, in order to produce cannabis, you have to have a license from Health Canada. So a license can be applied for. There's a lot of application requirements, and it's through the federal government that commercial cultivation permission is granted. The provincial level is where sales are regulated. So sales within Ontario can either occur at the Ontario Cannabis store online or through licensed retail stores, and that's done through the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. Niagara Region's role really comes into play through the Niagara Regional Police if there's any enforcement reasons for them to be involved with cannabis. And then the town of Fort Erie's role is planning, which is why we're involved in this study. As a land use, the town has opportunities to regulate cannabis production and to enforce the bylaws related to it. So that's sort of the purpose of the study, is to look at the town's role. So a little bit of background about cannabis production. In terms of getting a license from Health Canada to produce cannabis on a commercial scale, there's an application process. And in fact, even when applying for a license, as well as if a license is granted, revoked, or changed, an applicant must notify the local government, fire authority, and police force. So the municipality would be aware of any licensed facilities within their area. Also, the rules stipulate that only cultivation, propagation, and harvesting is permitted outdoors. And other activities such as your processing or your packaging, that has to happen indoors. And none of the licensed activities are permitted to take place within a dwelling. In terms of security, there are requirements through the licensing process that the site must be designed to prevent the unauthorized access and also always be monitored. And there's also air filtration requirements that an appropriate system should be in place to prevent the escape of odor. And so there is an application process that requires a lot of information be provided to Health Canada before license is granted. And this information includes site details, physical security, good production practices, as noted there on the slide. There are a couple different types of licenses that can be applied for through Health Canada. Cultivation license, a processing license, sale for medical purposes. That part happens through the mail. Otherwise, it has to go through the province's retail store format. Analytical testing and research are the different licenses, and someone could apply for multiple of these licenses at once. So another thing to consider in Ontario is the Farming and Food Production Protection Act, which is an act that applies in the province, and it defines agricultural operation. I have the definition listed there. And essentially a licensed cannabis cultivation and processing facility would be captured under that definition. The act states that no municipal bylaw applies to restrict a normal farm practice on as part of an agricultural operation. So that's something that we have to consider as we work through this study, is making sure we are cognizant of this act. So also, we looked at the town's official plan. And I just want to note here, so the Cannabis Act, which permitted cannabis as a commercial use or recreational cannabis, came in 2018. Prior to that, there was the marijuana for medical purposes regulation, which permitted medical marijuana growth. And so there was, as a result of those earlier rules, there was some updates to the official plan and zoning bylaw made a few years ago to specifically address medical marijuana. So that's I'm just going to go over what's currently in the in effect documents in the town. So as I mentioned, official plan amendment number 18 introduced medical marijuana policies within the official plan and permitted the use within the agricultural, rural, open space designations, as well as in the industrial business park designation. And it also, the policies require that the use be subject to site plan control, and that that there be regard to the Ministry of Environment's D6 guidelines in determining appropriate separation distances and the necessity for any further study. Now, the zoning bylaw currently also addresses medical marijuana and grow production facilities. And this use it's a defined use, as I have listed on this slide there. And it's this use is permitted in agricultural, rural, industrial, and prestige industrial zones. And then also, because the definition of agricultural use also includes the medical marijuana and grow production facility, any zone where agricultural uses are permitted essentially permits this use as well. So those are the existing framework. And I'll also note that the entire town is subject to site plan control. And the site plan control bylaw specifically requires that medical marijuana and grow production facilities require a site plan control application. So as part of our study, we looked at what other municipalities in Ontario have done within their planning documents with regards to cannabis as a land use. As I note here, a number of municipalities do address cannabis within their official plans. And we also looked at what they did in their zoning bylaws. So there's quite a bit of information on this table, but essentially what I wanted to highlight is the first column indicates which municipalities permit indoor cultivation within their agricultural and rural areas. The second column identifies which municipalities permit indoor cultivation in their employment areas. Then you can see, then there's a bit of a drop. Fewer of them in the third column permit outdoor cultivation within agricultural and rural areas, and only a couple actually permit outdoor cultivation in their employment areas. And I just wanted to highlight the difference between the check mark and where it says zoning bylaw amendment. So the check mark indicates that in their zoning bylaw, this is a use that's permitted, listed as permitted. Whereas if it says zoning bylaw amendment, that means that someone would have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment application process, which involves a public process and going to council in order for the use to be permitted in the zone. So as part of our best practice review, we also looked at any specific requirements that different municipalities had put into their planning documents with regards to this use. So one of the things that we frequently saw was a minimum setback from other uses, typically sensitive uses such as your residential, your institutional, so your schools, and your open space zones or your parks. Typically, we saw a range between 70-meter separation distance to about 300 meters. Most often it was at the 150-meter range, however. We also noted a separation distance requirement to other cannabis facilities, a requirement for security fences, that loading spaces be hidden or enclosed. The requirement for site plan control was common, that the facility be designed and operated in accordance with the federal regulations, that there be a restriction on outdoor storage or signage, and also that there be a restriction on a residential use being located on the same lot, with some of the things we saw. So from all this information, we came up with a number of high-level questions for the town to consider, and they're listed here, but I actually go through them on the next slide. So I'm just gonna skip right to this next slide. So the first thing that we looked at was permitting the use indoors in agricultural areas. So, and here I'm gonna go through a bunch of what the different options are and the pros and cons of each. So the first option is permitting indoor cultivation in agricultural areas as of right. So that would be like with the check mark if I was referring back to my table a few slides ago. So it's listed in the zoning bylaw as permitted. So the pros of this is it aligns with permitting indoor cultivation of other crops in greenhouses in the agricultural and rural area, and it also aligns with the existing permission for medical marijuana grow and production facilities in Fort Erie's agricultural and rural areas. The cons of this is that there's a little bit of lack of information available in terms of complaint mitigation system from Health Canada, and there we have heard the concern that there's going to be nuisance with these facilities. and the lack of clarity of how complaints are going to be dealt with. So then the next option is I'll call it option 2, which is permit indoor cultivation in agricultural areas through a zoning bylaw amendment. So this would be where there's that extra process step required, where each facility would have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. So the pros of this is it provides the town with the opportunity to consider the use on a case-by-case basis and involve the public each time, and it gives the town the opportunity to request studies related to potential nuisances. And then the cons of this is it's actually a different approach because of what's currently in the zoning bylaw in terms of the permission for medical marijuana. And then the last option for this question is not permitting indoor cultivation in agricultural rural areas at all. The pros of this is then you don't have any nuisance concerns, but on the flip side, the cons is we didn't find any outright examples of prohibition of indoor cultivation in the example municipalities we looked at. So there's the risk that this gets appealed. It may be deemed not to comply by the Normal Farm Practices Protection Board. So that goes back to the Farming and Food Production Protections Act that I was speaking about earlier. And there's also noted that indoor cultivation for medical marijuana is already permitted in the zoning in these areas. So the other big question that we looked at was whether or not to permit cannabis production indoors in industrial areas. So the pros of permitting it is that post-cultivation uses, so your things like your processing, your packaging, that's not that dissimilar from what happens in industrial use anyways. So there's a similar potential for nuisance there. And then also industrial areas are typically removed from sensitive uses to start with. Medical marijuana and grow production facilities are also currently permitted in industrial areas in Fort Erie. And then the cons are that little information is available from Health Canada in terms of the complaints. So similar to what I spoke of on the last slide is just understanding the potential for nuisance and how those could be mitigated and enforced. So the next thing we looked at was outdoor cultivation, and the question being whether or not to permit cannabis production outdoors in agricultural and rural areas. So the pros of this is that cultivation constitutes a permitted use in agricultural and rural areas, and if prohibited, it could be appealed to the Normal Farm Practices Protection Board. And the cons is that little information is available about the effects specifically of outdoor cultivation. So how nuisances, the risk of nuisances and how these would be mitigated is a concern. And we also, there's also options with regards to implementing some of the requirements that we saw in the other municipality zoning bylaws, such as requiring a separation distance to sensitive land uses or separation between facilities, etc. And the last question that we looked at was, should site plan control bylaw address cannabis production, and so should this use be subject to site plan control? And just to explain a little bit what that means, essentially that's a process where before a use would be brought onto a property, they'd have to submit information to the municipality about the layout and the function of that use, and it allows the municipality a chance to gain more information about what's being proposed and also enter a site plan agreement. So option 1 is update the site plan bylaw to specifically address the use. And so the pros of this is it provides the town a better opportunity to mitigate nuisance potential and enforce matters through the site plan agreements. And also medical marijuana's facilities are currently subject to site plan control in the town, and the site plan agreement can address matters such as odor, allowing for easier enforcement if something becomes an issue. And then the cons of this is Health Canada already reviews the layout of the facilities, and so it's whether the con is whether or not this is needed. And then for option 2, if you just leave the site plan control bylaw as is, the pros and cons are essentially flipped, with the con being there's less control on the placement of the building and a requirement and a potential to require additional information and enforce matters through a site plan agreement. So Lindsay already spoke about this, so I won't go into too much detail, but all the information that I just went through on the different slides, including the options, is what we would like to hear back from everyone on. So our survey's been designed to ask some of those questions and get some feedback on that. So I encourage you to go onto the town's website and let us know what you think. Of course, we'll be, as part of this process this evening, we'll get to hear from you as well, but we do encourage you to fill out the survey. And just to kind of summarize everything, I wanted to kind of finish with the Federal Cannabis Act and regulations do outline that municipal bylaws apply to cannabis-related uses. So, what we're considering is that regulating any use must be justified with rationale of what makes the use unique and what steps are appropriate to deal with nuisances and concerns related to that use. So this is sort of where we are in the study. We're looking at all the options, and in phase 3, we'll come back with what our recommended option is and the implementation tools for that, so that that could be implemented. So that's it for my formal presentation. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to hand it back to Lindsay for now.
Great, thanks so much, Suzanne. That was very informative, and appreciate you guys, being here this evening and putting all that information together for us. I will reiterate that this presentation, as well as the background information report that SGL has done, is all available on the Let's Talk Fort Erie website. So keep pushing it, but feel free to check out that site for more information. Mackenzie, do we want to start her off? Bring our folks in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to invite our first speaker to speak with the open house hosts. And I'd just like to give you a reminder that we will be providing you with 10 minutes to speak or ask any questions. And please provide your first name and address prior to speaking. So I will bring in our first panelist. Hi, John.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hi, John. Thanks for joining us. Sorry.
Pleasure. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to attend the presentation and to speak. So I'm a resident of Ridgeway, which is, as you well know, a part of the greater town of Fort Erie. And I guess I wanted to start off by indicating that, Fort Erie is a unique community in terms of the greater Fort Erie area, as our town has annexed, several smaller communities over time, and encompasses quite a large space and lots of different communities from, high density residential all the way through to rural residential and agriculture, industrial, etc. So I think that we've got to take that into consideration as we plan for whatever approach is taken to industry, and in this case, the implementation of the town bylaws surrounding cannabis. I think that you've made some interesting points, which I think are important, and I'd like to suggest that I would be very much in favor, as I know a great many of us who have been involved in this topic over the last couple of years. I think we'd be very interested in the town taking the approach of, I think what you called it, a zoning bylaw amendment, such that folks that were interested in going into the business of growing cannabis within the town limits would need to submit application and documentation and allow for an opportunity for the town folks to review and understand and have a voice in whether or not that is approved by council. I think that's important, again, based on the uniqueness that Fort Erie has become over time. I know that we can't turn back the clock, but I want to speak to a situation that has occurred in the community that I live in. And I think that had this happened in advance, we would have benefited from this experience and from the good research that you've done. I live in an area that is surrounded by approximately 50 rural residential homes, the vast majority of which are 1 to 2 acres. There are some larger parcels, and just the evolution of this area over town. There is an agricultural area right in the heart of this, right in the center of this, which has since been approved by the town for a future cannabis operation. And I think we didn't benefit from this process at the time, but there are about 50 residential, rural residential homes that surround this area, and many of us are within 100 meters of where this would likely transpire. So I think my reason for wanting to speak is I don't want that to happen to other residences that are similar to ours, other communities that are similar to ours. And we've heard lots about the rights of those with agricultural designation to be allowed to grow anything that I guess can be legally grown. I think that's great, but I also think that there are times where we need to understand and take a bit of a common sense approach. Not all agricultural land is created equally. We do have 300, 400, 500 acre farms that you could conduct any number of businesses on, and no neighbors would ever have an idea of what was happening. But right in the heart of a rural residential area, all of us are going to be subject to the noise, the odor, the lighting around the clock due to security concerns, the high barbed wire fencing, the additional traffic. And I know you're not speaking to the retail component, but we understand that ostensibly, if you're allowed to grow marijuana on your property, the provincial government is allowing you to sell it from your property. So concerns around additional traffic, and frankly, it's going to take the aesthetics of a very beautiful natural neighborhood, and we're going to have a large metal, unattractive, noisy, lit building right in the middle, and that's what we have to look at, as opposed to some fields, some crops, some farming that is much less offensive to the community. So thank you for all the work you've done in reviewing this important issue. I think anything that can be done that allows the elected officials and the folks in town to have some say, and to ensure that future cannabis operators have to present their plans and get them approved or not, depending on the situation and the merits of that. So that's what I wanted to share, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate those comments, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to speak with us and to join us. So thank you.
So I'll now be inviting in our second speaker for the evening. So we have Eleanor next.
Hey everyone, my name is Eleanor and I'm from Pro.
Sorry, Eleanor, we're having a little hard of a time hearing you, actually.
Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a bit better. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so my name's Eleanor. I'm from You Can Grow, and we are a turnkey service provider for entering and operating in the cannabis industry, and we specifically deal with the microclass cultivation and processing licenses. My title here is the COO and the Chief Regulatory and Compliance Officer, meaning that I stay up to date on all regulatory requirements, including those from the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, in order to ensure that all of these cannabis businesses are staying in compliance. Health Canada is very strict with their compliance regulations, as I'm sure you guys saw through Suzanne's presentation there, and they have restricted and revoked licenses for non-compliance. We've actually recently received one of our micro-cultivation licenses here in St. Catharines for one of our sites, and have therefore successfully complied with all regulations from all levels of government. We have also built numerous cannabis production sites and continue to partner with municipalities like Fort Erie to support their local economic development while being mindful of those residents' concerns. Again, we have complied with all these regulations for odor, light, and noise pollution. And our main point is that we've been in the cannabis industry for 20 years. And obviously, this was before cannabis was actually legalized federally. But that also means that we had to implement extreme odor and light mitigation controls in order to protect the growers that were in the industry who were risking their freedoms and could go to prison. So what we do is we actually are now able to implement those same systems that were used on the black market, and we now implement those into the legal market, and our neighbors are actually thanking us for that. And it's a tried and true system that we implement. Now, I know most people often retort with, but now you're growing at scale, and how could those systems possibly cover all of that square footage? And our response to this is we specialize in indoor micro cultivation, and that's micro with a big capital M. And this means that the maximum square footage allowed for canopy space is 2,152 square feet, or 200 meters squared. Unlike, I should explain that the canopy space for the 2152 is actually the footprint of the plant. So you can have a larger facility, say a 3,200, a 4,000, a 5,000 square foot facility, but under that micro cultivation license, you are restricted by plant space to 2,152 square feet. Okay, so I want to give you guys a comparison with the micro class licenses compared to the standard class licenses. I'm pretty sure we are the only micro cultivation in the entire Niagara region. Everyone else is a standard producer, such as Canopy Growth in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and they have no restrictions on their canopy space. As you can see on Google Earth, they have acres and acres of greenhouses, and they're growing hundreds of thousands of kilos of cannabis per year. And it's also in a greenhouse, which makes it very difficult to control for odor and light, as I'm sure all of the residents, even in Fort Erie, can attest to, because that light pollution travels quite a fair distance. So I just want to give you a little bit of a visualization as well, comparing the micro cultivation business to a standard processor. So we have 2,152 square feet of space, and that's just not one grow room, because that's still quite a fair bit of space to clean the air and to protect it from light coming out of the building. What we do is we actually split this canopy space up into 4 to 10 equal rooms. And so we've actually reduced each room size down now to the 200 to 500 square feet each. So in all of our rooms, each and every single one is equipped with a carbon air filtration system that not only cleans the air, but also deodorizes it. On top of each room having its own air filtration system, we also equip the facility with filters so that the minute amounts of odors that actually do escape from the rooms are caught by the facility system prior to anything being exhausted from the building. And like I said before, this is a tried and tested system. Now, as for light mitigation, like I said, we do focus on indoor cultivation and processing facilities. And that means that there are no windows into the grow rooms. There are no windows into the building. There are no issues with light pollution in these style of grows and licenses. I want to jump back now quickly to the cannabis regulations issued by the federal government, or Health Canada. And so Health Canada requires a certain level of odor mitigation. And I know this tends to be the number one concern for residents, is the odor pollution. And I wanted to offer some support with ensuring the compliance of that. So if there is a concern with odor pollution coming from a licensed facility, you are actually able to report this to Health Canada. And once it's reported, they will send out an auditor to that site who will do a check, and if you are out of compliance, they're going to issue a fine, and then they're also going to obviously request that you fix that problem. This can go as far as them restricting the license or even revoking it if you don't adhere to those regulations. So with cultivation, Health Canada already implements quite a stringent standard on how we operate and how we control for odor. Next, I wanted to talk about where we're seeing a lot of odor and light pollution and where we're finding that the residents are coming to us with their concerns. So unfortunately, the majority of this light and odor pollution is coming from the ACMPR licenses that are being issued by Health Canada. I know we weren't talking about that, but it is important just to note that these licenses are very different. So the ACMPR licenses are for personal medical production, which means, unfortunately, no regulatory body can actually interfere with the growth. Instead, like Susan said, the law enforcement are the ones that need to determine whether illicit activity is going on and how to reprimand for that. What we've seen over the past couple of years, especially in Lincoln, Pelham, and Niagara-on-the-Lake, is that when we've implemented restrictive bylaws on commercial cannabis licenses and production, it leaves the black market and generally the ACMPR growers space to move in and operate completely unregulated in these areas. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, sorry, one second, can you hear the phone in the background or it's too far away? My apologies. Sorry, so as I'm sure you've experienced, residents of these municipalities get very upset because there are no regulations to actually control the light and the odor that are coming from these ACMPR licenses. So in our experience and in our expert opinion, we do urge municipalities to be mindful of the bylaw restrictions they're implementing in terms of cannabis, because they could actually spur further illicit, unregulated activity in these neighborhoods. And I urge you to think of it like this. So there's tons of greenhouses and farmland up for sale in the Niagara region, right? Lots of people are retiring from their greenhouse businesses. And so they're putting these up for lease and sale. Last summer alone, we had 3 greenhouse busts in the Niagara region, each worth $30 to $40 million of illicit product. And it's not just cannabis that they're having in these greenhouses and farms. They also have cocaine, fentanyl, and firearms. And this is all in the Standard or in the Niagara Post. So, and actually, anecdotally, we did try to purchase some greenhouse property in the region for commercial cannabis activities last year, but we couldn't because the bylaws in place wouldn't allow us to actually open a legal cannabis business. Therefore, these illicit activity and these producers are moving into the properties and using them for those illicit purposes. And I'm not trying to scare you, but it actually is a reality. And legalizing and appropriately regulating the cannabis industry within the municipality will push out or convert those illicit producers. It'll generate lots of tax revenues. Cannabis is taxed like crazy. And it'll create jobs, or at the very least, it'll take up all the real estate and force the black market growers back into their garages and basements. So before I give the mic over to the next person, I wanted to quickly clarify some points I read in the presentation available on the Let's Talk Fort Erie website that Susan just went through.
Eleanor, I will let you know that you are just approaching the 10-minute mark, so just give you another minute, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Just find some security requirements. So in a standard producer, you have to video monitor 24/7. That's not the case for a micro, just to let you guys know. Then the restrictions on signage and promotion, I know that was another question in the study. Health Canada actually already does restrict signage and promotion. I think it's something like 4 centimeters large for a sign, like each letter for a sign, so it's very, very small. The separation distances are also already covered by Health Canada. they don't allow cannabis facilities less than 150 meters away from anywhere a young person would be, such as a school, daycare, or a park. Excuse me. And lastly, Health Canada does not allow cannabis activities or commercial cannabis activities in its dwelling. But to clarify this, it doesn't mean that someone who lives on a farm is prohibited from starting a commercial cannabis business. It just means that they can't do it in the actual dwelling, but they can still use their barn and their farm and the greenhouses and whatever else. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Eleanor. Really appreciate your comments and your insight and your knowledge. Thank you for coming this evening.
All right, so I will be bringing in our next speaker. Hi, Franco. Hopefully you can hear us. Oh, perfect. I see you have your camera. Perfect.
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Hi, Franco. Thanks for participating this evening.
Thank you very much for letting me get a little bit of info out of this. I guess overall, I've actually been involved in some of the grow ops in the region, and I'm just got a few comments. SGL, are they any way involved or have any vested interest in ongoing grow ops in the province of Ontario right now? And if so, are they implementing rules that they've actually been confronted with? And if so, are they hopefully going to be able to help people that are applying for licenses in Fort Erie through the process and not allow bylaws that have been implemented by other regions to basically extend the whole procedure? I mean, in the long run, as the previous speaker has stated, it will produce a lot of taxes, and it is a viable business, provided that the new businesses which are being applied for will be compliant. I was reading through the study that you had done, and I believe one of the speakers has mentioned the Farming and Food Production Protection Act. The one thing that should probably be addressed to the fullest, it says, no municipal bylaw applies to restrict a normal farm practice carried on as a part of an agricultural operation. I'm not sure whether the town of Fort Erie is clear that cannabis is part of its agricultural operation. And if it isn't, I think that has to be first and foremost addressed. And then I guess that carries on to my next part of that question or worry. If that is what the act states, does that allow the officials which we have in power at the town of Fort Erie to make the final decision for these applicants? Or does the federal government and Health Canada make the final decision, even though the applicants are complying with all the restrictions that are out there? I think that's one act that we really have to clarify for all applicants in the town of Fort Erie. The only other issue that I really have is I've read through the survey here, and under the agricultural zone, it says that the cultivation of medical marijuana is only permitted indoors within these zones. I believe it's on page 18 of the study. And yet, further in your study, it says that we're allowed to cultivate outdoors. That's something that has to be clarified also. Hopefully within your study or somebody looks into that. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, could be, but it kind of captures my eye that one area of your book says only indoor cultivation is allowed. And I think I'm right in saying that under the requirements or the allowances in the town of Fort Erie, there is allowable outdoor growing.
Maybe
Yes.
Franco, you could just respond to that.
Great.
What the report says is that currently,
Yep.
for medical marijuana, it's allowed indoor. For outdoor, we're providing the options. We're looking at it for now for the new recreational cannabis growers. Okay. We're looking at options, and one of those options could be allowing it outdoor. One of the options could be allowing it indoor. So we're looking at those are options for the municipality to consider. But currently, for medical marijuana, that was the previous act, it's indoor.
Does that also apply to a micro
Yeah.
license? So
that applied to anybody who had a medical marijuana license.
Okay, all right. Is that stated in our zoning area? Is zoning bylaws anywhere?
Yes, medical marijuana is defined because it had to comply with the previous federal act, which would only permitted medical marijuana. So those bylaws were prepared under that previous act. Now the new act is out on recreational cannabis, and that's why we're doing this study, or that's why the municipality is doing the study.
So as it stands right at this moment, then no outdoor growing is permitted in the town of Fort Erie.
Right now, in the town of Fort Erie, under the zoning bylaw, only medical marijuana is permitted indoors.
No, and then I'm going to say it again, no outdoor.
No recreational cannabis, period, is permitted in the zoning in the town of Fort Erie. Only indoor medical marijuana is permitted.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's fair. I guess those were my concerns, and it's just reading the study there. It's not, I find it a little bit misleading, but if it's brought forth and made sure that the applicants know about that. I know of 3 outdoor growing operations right now, obviously not at this time of the year, and they're quite large. So I was just kind of put in a little bit of a gray area, because I know the town officials have visited these sites for the building purposes, but didn't make any comments, knowing that there's cultivation of marijuana on the same premise within these buildings. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood it. No outside growth. That's perfect. Okay, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Franco. I appreciate your comments. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be bringing in our next attendee, who is Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Hopefully you can hear us. If you're able to, please unmute yourself and you can proceed with your questions or comments. I'll wait maybe one more minute, and perhaps if Lynn wants to come back in, we can bring her in at the end. Okay, Lynn, I'll be moving you back into the attendee waiting room, but please feel free to raise your virtual hand at the end, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or hear your comments. Okay, so I'll be moving on to our next attendee, Derek. Hi, Derek. Hopefully you can hear us. We do have you as a panelist in the webinar at the moment, so if you are able to unmute yourself, please go ahead and do so. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next speaker. And again, please feel free to indicate to us at the end that you'd like to speak if you wish to do so. So our next speaker is Denise. I will be bringing Denise in now.
Hi, Denise.
Hi, I have no comments at this time.
Okay, that's great
Okay.
for joining
Okay.
us.
Okay, so we'll be moving on to our last registered speaker, speaker 11, Jeff.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can. Hi, Jeff. Welcome.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to add. I do have a lot of questions about how this affects how the cost of this works, though, because it seems to me that although it's a farm activity, it's not really a traditional farming activity in that there's a lot of water that's required. I know one of my neighbors already had their well run dry fairly recently. So I'm just wondering, and you know, the testing of the water table, the testing of the water drainage swamp that is at the end of the property that's aside from mine. I'm just wondering who's going to be responsible for testing all that stuff for my neighbors who are on wells and for, you know, making sure that the facility that goes in next to my property is compliant with all of the regulations and such. As an agricultural facility, they're going to pay the lowest tax rate, which is substantially less than what a residential cost would be. So I'm wondering about who's picking up the cost for all of these things, how it's going to be addressed for if there's a water table issue or infrastructure issues if they have to truck in water. I know that at the end of Birdie Street, there is a water filling station, which is already utilized by most, by some residents anyway. So that creates a lot of heavy water trucks going up and down the road. If there's marijuana facilities that are going to use that route, who's picking up the cost for the extra damages to infrastructure, to and that sort of thing? From my personal point of view, my understanding is that a lot of these facilities have to have cameras. What is there in place to ensure that my property isn't going to be filmed or my neighbor's property is not going to be filmed? Because that's a pretty significant impact on our rights as, like I have a farm, but if I want to go out and do something out there, I think I have the freedom not to be monitored by a neighbor, right? So I'm just trying to figure out what the town's position is on that sort of thing and what they intend to do about bad actors, if there are any. From reading the news, I know there's a lot of, or there's at least some facilities that don't necessarily play by the rules because they're trying to skirt production limits and all that sort of thing. So I guess the town doesn't really seem to have addressed any of the concerns that we as neighbors of one of these facilities have. The one beside us hasn't been built yet, but it has site plan approval, I understand. And from what I can tell, it has wells planned. So there's just all these concerns that I don't think have really been heard very much by residents. I understand, like the people that I talk to understand the need for development and jobs and that, but there also needs to be some consideration taken for people's privacy and people's personal enjoyment of their property, in addition to the goal of having greater economic growth and that sort of thing. And it's just sort of as an extra add-on, will any bylaw that's developed or any regulations that are changed, will they apply to places that have already had site plan approved? And would those people be grandfathered in under the former regulations, or would they be made to become compliant with new regulations? And then in the bigger picture, there was obviously a lack of foresight on some of the town leadership in terms of not addressing this sooner. I mean, marijuana has been legalized for 3 or 4 years now, I think. And the fact that it's taken this long to even get to this point is kind of disturbing, right? So I'm just wondering about all of these concerns that I know myself and many of my neighbors have. It extends to other places too, because in our case, it's a very small property that they're growing on. I think probably as small as they could get, which whatever. My understanding is that they've complied with everything. That's with all the current rules. That's fine. But I can't help but wonder why my enjoyment of my property and my neighbors' enjoyment of their properties is being put second place to this facility that sort of just moved in last year, and that's what's going to go on. So I just feel like I just wanted to speak to the fact that a lot of residents, not just in our, like all over the area, are going to be affected as more of these facilities are developed. And I guess I just wanted to make the point that it doesn't feel like people are listening to the current landowners or the people that have been here already before. So anyways, I just wanted to thank you for letting me talk for a couple of minutes, and that's about all I have, I think.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Again, appreciate those comments. I will let you know that we do currently through site plan, we do require groundwater study, and we also do require monitoring for that. So that is something that we do have in place now. And I would anticipate that any future, changes that we would be looking at, we would be looking at maintaining that or maybe improving on that. So just wanted to let you know that that is something that we are aware of, and we do, take into consideration when we're dealing with the site plan applications.
Yeah, but and my concern is that's good. But the concern is who pays for all these? Because at the end of the day, it's probably going to be Joe Blow taxpayer. So I'm wondering if there shouldn't be some sort of an assessment done on these facilities above and beyond what the agricultural property rate is, because they are using more resources, I guess you could say, to run their facility.
Can I just add a few responses to you, Jeff? I just want to start with your previous comment of listening. We are listening. That's why municipality chose to do this study, and that's why we're here tonight. We are actually listening, and we want to hear from people, and that's why we have the survey. So thank you very much for your comments, and we're going to take those comments into account. In terms of paying increased taxes, I hear you. Unfortunately, that's outside of the ability of the municipality to deal with. That's all taxes, and what people pay what people are assessed at is addressed by MPAC, which is a provincial agency. And so the town has no control over what you're assessed at. They control the taxes you pay on your assessment, but they don't control that, unfortunately, have any say over on that. You also asked about bad actors and what the municipality can do. In terms of production and the part that it has to deal with their license, that's totally a federal jurisdiction. and Health Canada. So the municipality can't regulate production. What we can do is look at zoning requirements and site plan requirements, and that's why we're looking at these options. Do we put in separation distance? Do we require that they go through a zoning review? Do we require they go through site plan review? And do we set some parameters on the zoning? That's what the municipality can do in terms of regulating. And that's what we're looking at for the study. Unfortunately, things like production and whether they're meeting those, that's Health Canada. But on terms of the odor, yes, Health Canada can address odor, but we want to look at what can the municipality do to ensure that odor is not an issue, because I think this is one of the biggest issues that are out there. So that's what we're looking at as well. And for the cameras, that's an interesting new point I hadn't heard before. So we'll definitely look at that. So I just wanted to say, Jeff, we are listening to you, and we're going to be addressing these issues for you.
Okay, just to go back to the taxes, I'm a little confused on that, only because the town voted a bylaw recently for work on the Beaver Creek drainage that got me a $3,800 addition to my tax bill. So I'm wondering how you can say that it's controlled somewhere else when the town, when it wants to, can tax at whatever they like, really.
Only, no, actually not, Jeff, but under the Drainage Act, when you do improvements to a drain, you can assess people for improvements to drain. It's one of the few extra things that they can do. But they cannot determine what taxes class you're in. That's totally up to MPAC.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate those.
Thank you very much.
And like I said, we are like Paul did say, we are listening. We've got notes, and the privacy thing was a new one for me as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's definitely something to consider. So thank you.
So I am seeing, excuse me, one of our attendees that have raised their virtual hand to indicate that they'd like to speak again. So I'll start with bringing Franco back in. Hi, Franco, you're muted right now. If you could unmute your microphone. There we go.
Are we good?
Yes, we are.
Okay, sorry. Hope I'm not keeping you. I think this is directed back to Mr. Lowe's there. So I just printed off all the zoning bylaws and everything regarding that outdoor growth. And I went back to, it refers me back to the agricultural zone and all the bylaws set out for that, and redirects me to 7.9. And it comes up about maximum or outside storage requirements or requirements for medical marijuana grow and production facilities. All it states is outside storage of goods, materials, or supplies is not permitted. I still am not able to find anywhere in the bylaws where it says no growth is allowed. Can you please direct me where I'm supposed to be able to read that?
Lindsay, can you, do you have the exact bylaw reference in it?
Sorry, I'm just looking for that now. I'll let me have a look at that and see what I can find out. I might not have an answer right away there, Franco.
Yeah, I'm fully aware it's kind of tough to find everything in the spur of the moment, but that's one thing that's a stickler for me. And I've gone through numerous meetings at the town of Fort Erie, and it's very hard to deal with specifics because they're hard to find the results. But this one specific is just not there. I understand what everything is saying there, but it doesn't specify no growth outside of any sort. Or does it give us a related number of plants or a related area? Nothing. All that it pertains to is the storage, goods, materials, or supplies. And I can fully understand that one. I wouldn't want anybody to store any of the stuff that's required for growing cannabis. So I'd have to see that in writing in our bylaw. And I've gone through this before. Either I've missed it or we all missed it. But I think I would really like to have an answer to that in due time. If you can't find it now, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and actually, Franco, it's not in that section of the bylaw. It's actually in the definition section. So where we define medical marijuana, it does discuss sort of building and structures. So that I think that's where the information is going to be. So I will find that information, and I have your contact. So I will follow up with you on that.
Fantastic.
Cool.
That's perfect. Okay, that was just it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great. So at this time, I'd like to invite any of our registered attendees that have spoken already who might wish to speak again or ask any more questions to raise their virtual hand, or if there's anyone who didn't register but would like to speak this evening. Again, at this time, we encourage you to raise your virtual hand. So I am seeing our first speaker, John, that would like to come back in. So I will be bringing him back in.
Thanks for letting me back in. You may have said it and I apologize, but could you let us know what are the next steps? Obviously, you're taking away this information and there's some review and work to be done. Can you give us an indication of next steps? I will be checking in on our town website periodically, but if you can kind of provide us a bit of feedback, that would be helpful.
Suzanne, do you want to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll be taking the information. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I was muted. We will be taking the information from the survey and updating our report to have a summary, basically a summary of this evening and a summary of what we heard on the survey. And then the next step for us will be to come up with recommendations for what the town can do to update their planning documents. And I'd have to check the schedule. I believe that those will have some form of other a second public either open house or some public event that would allow people to make comments on those recommendations before they were brought to council for final decision.
Great, thanks very much. That's all for me.
Thank you.
So again, at this time, I'd like to invite any of our other attendees who'd wish to speak to raise their virtual hand to indicate to us that they'd like to do so. So I believe everybody here is joining by either mobile device or laptop. So you can raise your virtual hand by pressing the raise hand button under the panelist or participants section of your page. So just give a moment in case anybody would like to do so. So Lindsay, I'm seeing no one at this time that wishes to come in and speak.
Okay, so I think what we're going to do now is we will sort of leave the Zoom link open for the time being, and we're going to have the presentation sort of running. So if anyone does want to speak or to engage, feel free. We will still leave it open to do that, but we are going to all kind of mute and turn off our cameras, let the presentation play, and again, if anyone does want to speak, please, raise your hand, and we will be happy to answer any questions. But for now, if no one has any questions, we're just going to let this run, and we will, if we don't hear from anybody, we'll be back at 7 to say goodbye. So Mackenzie, I'll let you work your magic. And again, if anyone does have any further comments, feel free to raise your hand.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'll get the presentation going now.
Hi, everyone that's still watching. It is now 7 o'clock, so our meeting is officially over. I'd like to thank everyone for participating this evening. There was some really great discussion and some really great comments that came out of this, and we are going to take those back and have a look and come up with some policy recommendations for everyone. So please feel free to follow up with me directly if you do have any other questions or comments about the study. And please remember to visit Let's Talk Fort Erie for more information and to fill out that survey. Let's continue to stay safe and healthy, and everyone have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.